The Economic Club of Minnesota's mission is to provide a world-class, nonpartisan forum for national and international leaders in business and public policy to discuss ideas that affect how Minnesota can better compete in the global economy. The Economic Club of Minnesota, engaging the world, strengthening Minnesota.
I am Steve Sanger, and it's my honor to introduce our speaker today, Ambassador Mark Green. Now, Mark is currently the president and CEO of the Initiative for Global Development, which is a nonprofit organization that engages corporate leaders to reduce poverty through business growth and investment in Africa. He is a recognized leader in foreign policy and business communities. Ambassador Green served as a U.S. ambassador to Tanzania from mid-2007 to 2009. While there, he led a mission of more than 350 American and Tanzanians and was ultimately responsible for some of the world's largest U.S.-led development programs. Prior to serving as U.S. ambassador, Mark served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, where he helped craft key policy initiatives, including the Millennium Challenge Act and President Bush's history-making AIDS program. Ambassador Green was a representative from Wisconsin, and I asked him if he was here to primarily see the Vikings-Packers game this weekend, which I think would prove disappointing for him, in my own opinion. But he's not. He's here to talk to us about perhaps more substantive things. And he recently served as the senior director of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, which is a network of 400 businesses, NGOs, and policy experts and other leaders supporting a smart power approach to American foreign policy. We are really pleased to have Ambassador Green address the Economic Club. Minnesota companies are increasingly engaged in Africa, and many more are considering the opportunities there. For example, a company that I know well, General Mills, in 2011, teamed up with Cargill in a partnership, and then with Royal DSM and Bueller, which is an equipment manufacturer, to launch a thing called Partners in Food Solutions, which is a hunger-fighting nonprofit bringing food production expertise and processing expertise to small and medium-sized food producers in African nations. And I have seen that firsthand, and it is really a very impressive effort. To date, Partners in Food Solutions has worked with 400 food companies in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Malawi, impacting more than 137,000 local smallholder farmers who support an estimated 820,000 family members. So it's starting small, teaching skills, and increasing food production. Our 4 companies have provided nearly 500 skilled employees who have volunteered over 40,000 hours on more than 192 individual projects. And several of those employees I know are here today, and so a shout out to you. They're able to do that working here in Minnesota, of course, because of the technology that enables them to work on engineering projects that will ultimately benefit processors in Tanzania or Kenya or Malawi. Ambassador Green, we know much is being accomplished, and we look forward to hearing from you about the opportunities that lie ahead. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Mark Green.
As Steve mentioned, I did serve in Congress up through 2006, so I sometimes introduce myself by saying, I'm Mark Green. I have now been clean for 7 years. Thanks for mentioning that the Packers and the Vikings are playing. I am from Green Bay. I did grow up in the shadow of Lambeau Field, and I do know that we Packer fans can be a little bit annoying at times. I know, because I've been accused of it, that we think that the Packers are God's gift to football, and I'm here to tell you it's true. And some of you may know it is a true story that when the late Reggie White was looking for which football team he would go to as a free agent after the Philadelphia Eagles, Reggie, who was an ordained minister, said on TV that he was going to pray about it and God would tell him where to go. And of course, Mike Holmgren, smart man that he was, called Reggie's house and left a voicemail. Reggie, this is God. Go to Green Bay. And he did. So we are, in fact, God's gift to football. My remarks are entitled Africa's Economic Moment. And I chose that word moment very deliberatively because we are at a point of in time. Things have been different than they are now, and I think that things will be different in the months and years ahead. A dozen years ago, The Economist magazine famously ran a cover story with a map of Africa, and it was entitled The Hopeless Continent. 2 years ago, The Economist ran a cover story with a map of Africa, and it said, Africa Rising. Earlier this year, in his visit to Africa, President Obama stopped by Tanzania and said, the world is investing in Africa like never before. So I see Africa as the world's next major economic success story. What happened? What happened in between? Why is it that they went from the hopeless continent to a rising continent with new opportunities? Well, in the brief time that I have with you, I'd like to begin by suggesting that there are several forces at play that have made such a difference. The first one, and the one that I cannot overemphasize, is technology. Technology has literally changed everything. Now, my first involvement in development in Africa was as a volunteer teacher in Kenya, in Western Kenya, 1987, 1988. And in my little time as a teacher in that village, we had one wind-up telephone, literally a wind-up phone. You'd go down to the office, and you'd turn the crank, and you'd pick it up, and you'd say, operator, give me 662 Nairobi, and you'd put the phone down, and a half an hour later the call would come through, and you'd pick it up. I took a young man who was working for me at the time as my askari, my night watchman, and he had heard that his brother-in-law had fallen ill. And he said, Mwalimu, teacher, can you take me to use this telephone? So I brought him down there, and we went through all the procedures. And then as he got the phone, he began yelling in it, Alicia, Alicia, and he was yelling, and his hand was shaking as he was speaking. He had never touched a telephone before. And I said, but Michael, why were you yelling? And he said, but teacher, it's a long way to Nairobi. Makes sense. To where we are now. One of the members of my organization, and I should say IGD, the Initiative for Global Development, is a coalition of high-capacity businesses, African and American, that are dedicated to catalytic investments, including in technology. One of our members, Strive Masiyiwa, Forbes African of the Year last year, the founder and CEO of Econet Wireless, pointed out that in 1994, 70% of Africans had never heard a telephone ring. In 2010, 70% own one. Think about what that means, how much your world changes in that moment. In my little village of Mohoho in Western Kenya, none of my students in 1988 had ever seen a building more than 2 stories high. Nairobi might as well have been Geneva for all of them. Now they see it. They can go to the regional capital and go to a cyber cafe, or they can go to the community satellite television, and they see what's going on. They see what is all around them. Now, it's important to understand that when we say technology, I don't mean that Apple has suddenly built a new plant in Sigalagala. It's frugal technology. Because Africans are among the most creative people I have ever met in my life, and the most enterprising people I have ever met in my life. And so what they have done is taken frugal technology, mobile phones, and used them in ways that are remarkable. So the mobile phone explosion that Strive was referring to isn't simply a revolution in person-to-person communications, which it is and is important. It's a revolution in commerce. It's a revolution in science. It's a revolution in learning. In a place like Kenya in East Africa, we have M-Pesa, which many of you have read about. And M-Pesa is the ability to do financial transactions over mobile phone systems. More than half of all the transactions in Kenya now occur by mobile phone in M-Pesa. On the islands of Zanzibar, off the coast of the old Tanganyika in Tanzania, every Monday morning, 53 healthcare workers from around the islands look to see if they have had any positive tests for malaria. They use text messaging to send the results to an automated server back in Dar es Salaam, which automatically plots it against a comparable period in the preceding year. And if there's a blip, bells and whistles go off, and we pounce in with bed nets and with spraying and the medicines. They are on the verge of eliminating malaria in Zanzibar. Visa in Rwanda has a new technology. So Visa has mobile credit card transactions, intercarrier, interbank, complete open source. In the agribusiness field, every single day in Tanzania and many parts of Africa, we have farmers getting key information, key inputs by mobile phone. I have one client, one company, one member who, if you purchase that company's fertilizer as a farmer, every single day you will get a text message that tells you what to do that day based upon where it is in the growing season, based upon the projected weather. And that's a revolution in commerce. And that's helping us to reach out in ways we never could before. There's another force sweeping across Africa, no less important, but in some ways double-edged: demographics, youth. Half of all Africans are under the age of 20. In Tanzania, 70% of Tanzanians are under the age of 30. In Liberia, 65% of Liberians are under the age of 25. See if I can make this thing work here. Take a look at that graph. The 15 to 24 age group is growing faster in Africa than anywhere else in the world. By 2035, the continent will have the world's largest workforce. That's transformative. I said it was double-edged. It is double-edged because it does create enormous challenges. Technology creates rising demands, but also rising expectations. My students 25 years ago in that little village who had never been to Nairobi, they were desperately poor, and most of them didn't know it. They didn't have much of a voice in their government and voting, and most of them didn't know it. They do now. They see what is happening elsewhere, and they ask, why not us? It's a powerful democratizing force, but it's also a force that is dangerous where governments have limited capacity. Because it's not just jobs that young people want, real jobs, the kinds of jobs that you can raise a family around, the kinds of jobs that are inspirational. But again, on the positive side, this youth bulge is a remarkably potent economic market. And American businesses need to realize it. Because these young people are consumers as well as workers. Technology has created for them an appetite. And in many cases, an appetite for the very things that we make. And it is a tremendous opportunity for all of us. One of my members who I was with over the last couple of days, Susan Mashibe, is one of our Emerging Leader Fellows, was profiled in the Wall Street Journal a couple of months ago. And Susan's got a story that I think shows wonderfully about technology and what it can mean when married to the inspiration and hunger of youth. So Susan Mashibe was from the city of Mwanza in western Tanzania. And one day she learned that her parents and her younger brother were going to be leaving and going off to a conference. And as they left her, she was 4 years old at the time, in her heart, she began to fear and cry, and she said, you know, if I don't learn to fly, I won't be able to stay with my family. She became Tanzania's first FAA-certified pilot, woman pilot. When she had gotten her pilot's license, she was actually coming to the States, or preparing to come to the States, because she wanted to be a pilot for Delta. And then 9/11 happened. And then she thought, well, I'll never get a visa to come here and work. And so she took the $20,000 that she had saved up, and she put it into a business, because she noticed that a lot of private jets that were flying through Arusha and Dar es Salaam had no jet-side services, no one to service them. Well, she now runs Via Aviation, one of the most rapidly growing businesses on the continent. When I saw her on July 2nd, she had just gotten done providing jet-side services in one day to President Obama's Air Force One and President Bush's corporate jet that was bringing him for the African First Ladies Summit. And I said, yeah, that's not a bad day's work. That actually works if you can pull that off. Technology, youth, the challenges and the opportunities of youth. So what else does that mean for us? The other trend that's happening, and the timing may be just right, is the economic growth across the continent. 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in Africa. African economies have tripled in size since 2000. And it's not just broad macro growth, it's also the creation of real wealth for lots of working families. 27 countries in Africa, there are 54 countries in Africa, 27 have now reached middle income status. So all those stereotypes in the day of Africa, the hopeless continent, Africa's rising and has rising expectations and rising appetites. And contrary to stereotype, and this is something that I think is very important, when you ask people about why Africa's rising, why is Africa growing, you'll almost always get, well, they've discovered oil. They found natural gas. Most interestingly, the non-oil economic growth in Africa has averaged over 5.4% for the last 5 years. So the growth that's taking place in Africa is real, and it's broad-based. And again, it creates real opportunities. But here's the crossroads moment for every single person in this room. You see, I wish I could tell you that what we're talking about here today is a secret. I'm giving you information that nobody else knows, that somehow you can write this down and take it and you're cornering the market. Of course, it's not true. The rest of the world does know it. We're the ones who have been a day late coming to the dance. Even though 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa, only 1% of American foreign direct investment goes to Africa. In 2009, China surpassed the U.S. as Africa's largest trading partner. In fact, the EU nations, if taken as a bloc, have also surpassed the United States of America. But let's be real clear. This isn't about China. This is about us. We're the ones who are responsible for it with our policies and, quite frankly, not showing up to the dance. Other nations are boosting their stake, and they're rising quickly. Nations like Brazil, Malaysia, Indonesia, Turkey, UAE, South Korea. In fact, if you were to take a look at Africa and say, okay, who are the largest investors? The largest investors are China number 1, EU number 2, South Africa number 3. The U.S. is only 4th. So what's the answer? Well, there are lots of good answers for all of us. The first one is what some of your members are already doing, what Cargill is doing, what General Mills is doing, what Land O'Lakes is doing, and others. And it's really interesting, and we earlier today had some conversations about it. There's a lot of discussion about what's happening in Africa, about how to help lift lives, how to build communities and build opportunities. And so that inevitably seems to come to discussions about development programs. And we have programs like Feed the Future. We have a lot of good programs that are out there. But the most interesting thing is that the positive trends in Africa are not coming from the government at all. So 40 and 50 years ago, if you took a look at all the capital flows, U.S. to Africa, a little over 80% of it would be official development assistance, government assistance that we know traditionally. Today, that figure is 9%. So American commercial interest, some of it's foundations. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has done fabulous work. But far and away, the largest part of it are commercial investments. And the good news is some of the companies that I mentioned and others are going ahead and rushing ahead. And the investments that they're making and the goods that they're exporting into Africa really are lifting lives and creating remarkable opportunities. Other good news is that you're getting organizations beginning to talk about it. The fact that we're gathering here is obviously very positive. The Initiative for Global Development. In our model, what we do is we take successful companies in Africa, here in America, Europe, South Asia, and bring them together for CEO to CEO conversations. And there are some government policies that I think are making a positive contribution. The Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is now about 8 years old, was created, Mark and I at the time were both in the House working on the legislation, so it was Betty McCollum. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is a new model in development assistance. They're compacts. Countries earn the assistance. They have to reach certain scores on objective indicators, 20 objective indicators. And those indicators don't come from the U.S. government. They come from outside sources, Freedom House, the World Bank, Transparency International. And countries enter into a compact in which they agree to performance measures, complete transparency, and they must undergo reforms, Western-style reforms, that open up markets for American businesses to compete. But the most important thing they do is capacity building. So a year ago, a little more, I visited the country of Senegal. You know, we have two Senegalese with us here today. And I was in Senegal as the MCC compact was closing up. And I was taken aside by a couple of representatives of the government, and they said, "We want to thank you for the MCC program, but we want you to know that it's not the road. We can get roads anywhere. So the road you built is good, but that's not it. What you have shown us with the MCC is that you can actually build a road transparently, on time, under budget, without paying anyone off. We've never seen that before. You have proven to us that it works. More importantly, you now have helped educate Senegalese, and we will do it ourselves." I think President Obama's Power Africa is an excellent initiative because Power Africa, which works on access to reliable electricity, is based from the private sector. What Power Africa does is reach out to American companies that are already helping to deliver access to reliable electricity, on-grid, off-grid, looks to see what's succeeding, and then goes to those companies and says, "What would it take for you to do more? What's holding you back? Why can't you be here?" And then takes the power of the U.S. government from a policy and diplomatic perspective and tries to attack those barriers and to ramp up the transaction. So there are good government initiatives out there that are making an important difference. The private sector is, at the end of the day, the only way, in my opinion, to bring about sustainable development. When I went to present credentials in Tanzania as ambassador, President Kikwete did not ask me for a program, didn't ask me for a road, didn't ask me for a building. He said, "Ambassador, you must bring more investment here." In my experience, that's what African leaders are looking for, an opportunity. Why shouldn't they? Because that's what we're looking for, are opportunities. And the people in this room, you're the ones who will help create it. In some of the conversations we had before, people have expressed, on occasion, accurately, frustration. So sometimes working with governments in Africa strains the limit of patience a little bit. Absolutely. So why am I optimistic? I'll tell you one last little quick story. There's a friend of mine who's a deputy minister in Tanzania. He's a member of parliament as well. And his constituency is very rural. It's up against the Kenyan border. And it's one of the few places in the country that does not have mobile phone coverage, except for one place. There's a little village in that district that has got an area the size of a large table where they have connectivity, where they have mobile phone access. I don't know why. I have no idea what the science is behind it. And he said, that's done two things for us. He said, first, if you go to the village, people line up. There'll be 1,000 people lining up with their mobile phones to try to get to that spot. But he said, there's another thing. Every morning, a few guys get their cars, and they drive to villages in outlying areas, and they collect up everybody's cell phone, and they put them in bags. They go back to the village. They stand in line, and when they get to the front, they hold the bag of phones over the spot. All the text messages kick in, and they take them back to the villages, and they get a little bit of money. And I thought, that's good. That is good. That tells me that Africa's going to be okay, that there is naturally a generation of really entrepreneurial young Africans who will figure out a way. And what we have to do, I think, as Americans, as American business people and business representatives, our job is to make sure that we feed that hunger. That we reach out and, those guys who are standing in line with a bag of phones, those are the people we got to reach out to. If we can reach out to them with technology, education, and resources, Africa's going to be just fine. The rest of the world has figured it out. We're a day late, but the opportunities are there. Thank you.
Great. I guess we can take a couple of questions here. So is there some roaming mics? Who's got the first question? We have a mic over here. Yes, sir, Barry.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You talked about we're sort of late to the party. Obviously, China's been out there a while. At least for the past number of years, read a lot about a lot of their expansion being almost neo-colonial, right? It's Chinese workers doing a lot of work, primarily for resource extraction. I've read less about that in the past couple of years. I'd just be curious about your thoughts on what the kind of the current state of things is, as well as potentially what the long-term implications of that relationship are for if you were to look at it competitively between us and China in Africa.
It's interesting. Former Secretary of State Clinton, really in the last months of her term in office, I think really elevated the issue. A lot of talk about China's role in Africa and the potential risks. So, is it getting better? First, always difficult to know how to answer. There are 54 countries in Africa, and the experiences are obviously different everywhere. It is certainly fair to say that Chinese investments oftentimes require the use of Chinese banks and terms that create long-term obligations, sometimes tied to resources, but oftentimes simply tied to the use of Chinese workers in the use of Chinese financial institutions. It is an issue that should be elevated. But again, I guess my answer is let's just go out there and compete. When I ask African business leaders, African political leaders, why it is that they so often go with Chinese businesses, the usual answer I get is because they were there and you weren't. Where were you? In my experience, and again, don't want to stereotype or overgeneralize, African leaders desperately want what it is that America has to offer in the ideas and the technology. They like it. They want it. But American businesses oftentimes simply aren't on the scene. We're slow-moving. Our government programs are certainly slow-moving. The other reason that China succeeds is not just the size of the cash they're able to bring, but they respond. If the government of Tanzania says, you know, we're hoping to build a road here, one day later they said, okay, we're ready, let's go. And we need to be a little bit more responsive and a little more quick than we are. Again, in this area, my complaint is not so much about China. China has to take care of itself, although I do believe we have to vocally talk about international standards. We need to be there. We need to be more responsive, and we need to be at the dance, because if we are, we'll succeed.
Other questions? Over here.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm Kathleen Motzenbecker. I'm the director of the Minnesota Trade Office. Thank you for coming today. A couple of weeks ago, the Corporate Council on Africa hosted their Midwest, or their conference in the Midwest, but it was in Chicago. It's a biannual thing, but it really raised the profile of Africa for the Midwest. State of Minnesota was represented. I just wanted to throw it out. That happens every 2 years. Wouldn't it be wonderful? It was hosted here in Minneapolis 2 years from now. So I put it in people's ears to think about that, because it will be a coordinated effort we'd have to do. What is your opinion on Minnesota's unique niche with our diaspora community? Is that a tool in the toolbox that we can use to get the type of investments you're looking for?
Excellent question. First off, let me back up. I don't know how Africa takes on its agribusiness challenges and its food security challenges without the people who are here. This is ground zero on agribusiness, so it obviously should be here. But a lot of the answers to many of these challenges are right here. What was the second part of the question? Oh, sure. Diaspora, absolutely. You know, it's one of many tools that you should certainly turn to. There's a large diaspora community here. I think it does help you. It helps to provide context. Why don't American businesses go into Africa? As I said, this is not a secret. You read in the Wall Street Journal, it says Africa's rising. So why don't American businesses go? It's usually because either A, stereotypes, and I was joking about it before, if there's a problem in Mogadishu, Somalia, people pull their investments from Accra, Ghana. You know, I mean, we Americans, you know, it's the country of Africa. You know, so that's one of the problems. I think the stereotypes are a huge problem. But I think the other part to it is we don't know who to go to. You know, oftentimes American businesses want to be in a country, but they don't know who to reach out to. Who is it that they talk to? Who's the trustworthy voice? The diaspora can be very helpful on that front, if nothing else. We also have a commercial service. You should be demanding access to the ambassador, to the commercial service, to USAID. Talk to them back here, talk to them there. Go to the American Chambers of Commerce around the world. They're often excellent resources. The trade office here, I'm a big believer in trade missions. I think it's very helpful to bring delegations over to Africa, even if it's not a country that necessarily by itself will be a needle mover. It's a chance for American businesses to see an African workplace, an African farm, what the infrastructure is like, what the distribution is like, and it'll break down barriers, break down misconceptions, and make some of those contacts.
Well, to complete on time, let's give Ambassador Green one more round of applause. Thank you. And I have a gift here to give.
So As long as it's not purple, I'm very, very happy, so.
The Economic Club of Minnesota's mission is to provide a world-class, nonpartisan forum for national and international leaders in business and public policy to discuss ideas that affect how Minnesota can better compete in the global economy. The Economic Club of Minnesota, engaging the world, strengthening Minnesota.